Are you struggling to find your ancestors' marriage record? Are you wondering, are you missing clues in records that you perhaps already have? Well, in this video, we are talking marriage records, and we are talking about where you might be overlooking clues to help you find that marriage record. Hey there, if we haven't met before, I am Lisa with Are You My Cousin? And this video channel is designed to help you find your ancestors, grow your family tree, but not be overwhelmed in the process. So that sounds like your cup of tea. You're in the right place. Now, today's video is sponsored by newspapers.com, and I will have a little bit more about them in just a few moments. So let's talk about marriage records. They are one of those main records that we look for as genealogy researchers. Birth, marriage, and death, kind of those are some of the first records that we actually go for. Now, why is it we want that marriage record? Okay. Well, we want a couple's marriage record because of the type of information that is contained in that record. It contains things, certainly the bride and groom's names. Oftentimes, I will sometimes in later, more modern records with those, I see the full name of which I may not have seen anywhere else. So I want to go after that record if possible. But we can find oftentimes an age might be mentioned. So you can infer a birth date, or if you get lucky, maybe the whole birth date is actually there as well. Some records, some of those marriage records, depending on the time period in history, will mention a parent's name, both parents' names, maybe one parent or both. If not specifically stated, you always want to make sure you take a peek at who are the witnesses for that marriage and who might be the bondsman, again, for that time in history that they were required bondsmen. Those typically are people who are somehow associated with the bride and or groom. Oftentimes they were family members. So this is another way of finding other family members as well that can be researched later on. Or they could be someone who is closely associated with the family. But regardless, if you're seeing somebody named as a witness or a bondsman, then you want to make sure that you are taking note, because they have some importance in your research because they are associated with that family in some respect. And of course, when you have that marriage record, you've got that couple in a time and a place. And that's always very important when it comes to furthering your research in the future. So when it comes to going after that marriage record, first things first, we're probably going to end up looking on one of the genealogy databases, right? So I think most people who are interested in family history and genealogy are on one of the major genealogy databases, such as Ancestry.com, Find My Past, My Heritage, and of course, Family Search is out there, and that is available to search for free as well. So we don't really have an excuse not to actually go and search the genealogy databases that we actually have access to. But even if you are searching in the genealogy databases and you come up with nothing, you don't find your ancestors' marriage record, do not panic. You still have a lot of options out there at your disposal that you can use for your research. Now, certainly here in the US, the marriage records are county level records. And so we would need to, at that point, look at the county courthouse. Typically, if you don't live close to the courthouse, such as I typically am not close enough just to run down to the courthouse and make that request or do that search, I will actually just make a request using the procedures that courthouse has outlined on their website. So that's always an option. But sometimes the difficult thing is knowing which courthouse or which county that couple got married in, right? I know this has happened to me on a number of occasions. And typically what has happened, and once I've solved the mystery of where they got married, typically what has happened is they've gotten married in the next county over for one reason or another. So you want to take a look at where they were living. If you possibly can know, either through census records, through deed records, where the families lived within that county, consider, are they living close to a county border? Are they living close to a state border? They could absolutely have crossed the state border in order to get married because it might have been closer and easier to get to. Now, this actually came into play when I was researching some marriage records that I was having trouble to find up in the western part of North Carolina. So I reached out to a researcher who had a lot of experience and knew the county really well. And I explained my dilemma to her, that I was struggling to find these marriage records. I couldn't understand why I couldn't find them. And she said, well, Lisa, she said, I need you to think about a couple of things. She said, first of all, think about what time of year they would have gotten married. And I thought, what time of year? What does that have to do with anything about where to find this marriage record? But I did sit and think through it, and I said, well, I think that they probably got married in December or January, based on what other lines I've researched are doing. They were a farming family, and that would have been off season of farming. So this was a typical thing that you might see up there. She said, absolutely. She said, but you've got to remember something. We live in the foothills of the mountains. We get snow, we get ice, and that can make it really treacherous from some parts of the county at that time period to get to the courthouse. It was closer or easier sometimes to actually go to the neighboring county. And in this case, it was the neighboring state. It was to get married. It was safer. It might have taken a little bit further. It was further in distance, but it was a safer, easier access during certain times of the year, such as the winter months. And I thought, oh, gracious, I never thought about that piece of it. So when you need to try to figure out where your ancestors got married, sit back and think about what their life was like. Where could they have possibly gone to get married? Now, today's episode is sponsored by newspaper.com, as I mentioned at the very beginning. Today's episode is sponsored by newspapers.com, the largest online newspaper archive. Now, newspapers.com is a bit like a time machine. You can dive into their extensive online collection and really explore history as it happened. And this is so crucial for us as genealogy researchers to be able to understand the influences on our ancestors at a particular time in history. Well, the newspapers are your time machine to do exactly that. And with over 800 million digitized pages, newspapers.com is the place to go. Now, for listeners of today's video, newspapers.com is offering 20% off a publisher's extra subscription. Just use the code AreYouMyCousin at checkout, and you're on your way to uncover the extraordinary in the newspapers today. Okay, so you found no marriage record in the genealogy databases. You found no marriage record at the courthouses. Are you still at a loss? Nope, you still have options, of course. And that's where newspaper research is going to come into play. Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay, so we are over here at newspapers.com, and I wanted to show you this newspaper. This is the Halifax Gazette. You can see it right here from May 10th, 1928. It's the 7th page into this particular edition. Now, what I love here is it comes up here and it tells us there were 4 South Boston couples that were married on this particular Saturday. So this is, again, Halifax County. It's the Halifax Gazette. This is Halifax County, Virginia. I specifically was looking for marriage records out of South Boston because that is where I do a lot of ancestor research. But I wanted to kind of give you an idea of what you can find. So if you can't find a marriage record in a courthouse or in one of the online genealogy databases, head for the newspapers because, guys, people our ancestors put this in the newspaper. This was a big deal. And I expect for many of us, we had marriage announcements put in newspapers when we got married. We didn't have things like The Knot, which is a website up there. We didn't have all the websites and the social media that young folks have today. And so we don't see it maybe quite as often, although I think we do still see it in the newspapers. But absolutely, back for our ancestors, this was a big deal. So here we have actually 4 that are going to be listed. And you can see it's highlighted marriage because I use that term. But here we have on May 5th, Saturday, May 5th, Miss Annie Robinson Chafin to Mr. William Henry Lawson Jr. in South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina. So this is a couple that got married. It's in the South Boston. It's in the newspaper in Halifax County, Virginia, but they got married in South Carolina. So if you're looking for this particular marriage record in Halifax County, you're looking in the wrong place because they didn't get married there. They didn't even get married in the state. So this is important. And it goes on and talks about their parents. It names their parents, both for the bride and the groom, and tells where they are from as well. So this is an important piece to make sure that you are looking at. Again, if you come down a little bit further, we have another little announcement. Some of these might be full, some of these might be just tiny, but even a tiny announcement. We have Mr. and Mrs. Poindexter announcing the marriage of their daughter Helen to Mr. Willard Douglas of Lynchburg. And that marriage took place in Halifax. So we know that this one was in Halifax County, Virginia. So interesting though, but if you're a Douglas researcher, he was from Lynchburg. That's a different county. Okay. So they actually got married in Halifax County. So you can see all these wonderful little snippets and gives us a little bit more information about where they could have been. So this is a great, newspapers are a fabulous way in order to find where your ancestors may have gotten married and to find those clues. So I would encourage you to Jump into the newspaper research, explore newspapers, and see what you can find when it comes to these marriage records, marriage announcements, because they can lead you to further clues and get you pointed in the right direction when you're struggling to find the actual record itself. Okay, so I hope that was helpful for you to kind of see what kinds of information you can get in that newspaper and why it's worth your while to go and check out those newspapers for those marriage announcements. Now, you can also use census records in order to start to help narrow down perhaps marriage dates. So when you can track and see when a couple first appears as a couple, as a husband-wife couple in the census record. So you can start to deduce when, prior to a certain date, that they would have been married. Sometimes you will find in the records the number of years they were married. Well, that gives you certainly a great starting point to infer a marriage date, to narrow it down. Now, it's not necessarily going to sometimes help you find where they got married, but perhaps you might be able to, if you're tracking a family through the census record and you notice that most of the family is still in a specific area of a state, they're still in a specific county, then that would make your likely first places to start to look. But sometimes what we're needing to do is really just kind of start to narrow down that date first, and then pursue the search for at the county courthouse level. The other thing that I would encourage you to do is to talk to experienced researchers and experts in the area where your ancestors lived. They may have insights into any specific cultural insights, any specific customs for certain time periods of history that you may not know, that you may not be able to pick up from the records. So it's always helpful to be able to talk to somebody who is more local, who has researched an area and is more of an expert in a certain area than you might be, to really understand what was happening for your ancestors and to your ancestors, and what was impacting the decisions they made, including who they married, and where they would have married as well. If you would like to learn more about finding your ancestors' marriage records, be sure and watch the video on your screen now.